my name is Rebecca. I am a Wushu athlete, and I'm going to share 4 tips for better Wushu selfies. So a little bit of background first. I started Wushu blogging on Instagram and have received a really positive reception to that. So thank you to everybody who follows me on Instagram. I feel like I have learned a thing or two along the way and wanted to share it with you guys. So first of all, what do you need to take cool Wushu selfies? You really only need 3 things, maybe multiple of which you might already have. I use a cell phone, a tripod, and a shutter remote. This is the Pixel 6. I have done a combination of different things to take selfies, from just using the selfie timer to just using the remote to taking a video and exporting a frame from that. Thus far, my favorite way to do it is to put the camera on the tripod, set the timer to 3 seconds, and use the remote. Get everything lined up, use the remote, drop the remote, 3 seconds later the picture gets taken. I feel like this has been the best balance for me of doing as little as possible running back and forth between the camera and the pose and not having anything in my hand. I usually edit out the shutter remote after the picture has been taken. So how do you take a good Wushu selfie? The first thing to realize is that you are doing Wushu, and so you should definitely prepare yourself beforehand to do Wushu. This means stretching, warming up. If you'll be out there for a while, be sure to eat and be well energized. The last thing you want is to take a bunch of pictures and then look at them afterwards and realize, oh, my hips were really tight because I didn't warm up all the way, or I was really tired so everything kind of looks slumpy and not the way that I had intended. So tip number 1, prepare for your Wushu photo shoots, knowing that you will be doing Wushu, so your body has to be prepared to do Wushu. Tip number 2 for good Wushu selfies is that you want to, as much as possible, embody the characteristics that make Wushu beautiful and interesting to look at in your Wushu photos. For example, where are your eyes looking? Is your attention going the same way as your power would be going? Are your shoulders up? Are they relaxed? Are they pulled down and back? Are you breathing from your belly or are you breathing from your chest? I have a really bad habit of breathing from up here, both when I do Wushu and when I take Wushu photos, so trying as much in my mind as possible to apply the learnings from Wushu to making a cool picture. Hands, do the positions of your hands and your fists and your palms make sense? If you're doing a stance and a leg should be straight, is that leg straight? One big tip for this is to pay attention to how stable your feet are. In Wushu stances, you want to be as stable as possible in that you are generating power from the ground and pushing it somewhere. The same goes for your Wushu photos. If your feet are unstable, it will give an overall impression in your photo that whatever you're doing is not very strong. For this, I definitely recommend trying to find really good footing wherever you are where you're taking your pictures. And then if it turns out later on that there was some uneven ground or it was really hard to get a good footing to do a little bit of Photoshop or whatever editing magic you want to do to make it look like your feet are stable. I promise you this will give an overall much stronger impression in your stances. So yeah, tip number 2, try to, as much as possible, embody characteristics that make Wushu good into your Wushu. Here are some examples from a few years ago when I was a less experienced Wushu athlete. You can tell my shoulders are kind of slumpy, they're not pulled anywhere, my eyes aren't looking anywhere interesting, they're kind of just looking down. And then in this photo over here, my foot is rolling off the ground, which overall does not give a very strong impression. These are counter examples of embodying the characteristics in Wushu in my Wushu photos, which results in some pictures that aren't as impressive as they could be. Tip number 3 is also the same primary rule as making a good taolu, which is to showcase the things that you are good at and hide the things that you are bad at. So for example, for me, my shoulders are kind of tight. You will seldom see me with pictures with my arms over my head because it just doesn't look very good. If you have a stance, your right side or your left side is much better, do that one. If you're very flexible in a certain way, you can really show that off. But just like in a taolu, you wouldn't put your drop stance right at the beginning, right in front of the judge if you don't have a very good drop stance. Same goes for taking Wushu photos. Really emphasize the things that you're good at, and if there's something that isn't so good, turn it away from the camera, try to hide it, or just don't do it at all if you can avoid it. When I'm thinking of what poses to do for my pictures, I often just index through my taolu, in that these are stances that I know what direction might look good, and I've already spent some amount of time practicing exactly how I want to present them. So they will probably look better than some random pose that I had just thought up on the spot. So yeah, tip number 3, showcase what you're good at, hide what you're bad at. Think of it similar to putting together your taolu. You can even recycle parts from your taolu in your pictures. Tip number 4, which I think is the most interesting, is to use as much as possible the environment and the framing of your photo to emphasize what's already going on with your Wushu. For example, this movement here is called a liao jian. It's supposed to be as long and as extended as possible. You're supposed to reach as far as you can with that extended arm. However, in this photo, because the camera angle is looking down at the stance, it looks kind of small, which is the opposite of what you're trying to do. Compare it to one of these, where the camera angle is much lower, the movement automatically just looks much larger, much more extended, much more impressive. You'll find that in a lot of my photos, I'm up elevated on something just to give off the general impression that I am big or strong or more impressive in some way. Another good example is this stance here, the tabu. The stance itself has kind of a natural lean to it, and so when combined with the side of the hill here, I think it has a really interesting effect. However, if you take that same stance and you put it somewhere without that hill, on flat ground or just kind of wavy ground, it doesn't have that same effect and isn't as interesting to look at. So yeah, tip number 4, as much as possible, try to think about what makes the stance or position that you're posing interesting and use whatever elements in the environment that you can to emphasize what's interesting about that wushu. Okay, those are my 4 tips for taking interesting and good wushu photos. 1, be prepared to do wushu. 2, use principles from what makes wushu good and interesting to look at in your photos. 3, showcase the things that you are good at, hide the things that you're bad at. And number 4, try to use the environment as much as possible to emphasize and exaggerate whatever it is that you're going for in your wushu. Okay, those are my 4 tips for taking better wushu photos. If you follow any of these and take some interesting photos, definitely tag me on Instagram or you can leave me a comment below. I would also love to hear what other tips I missed. Do you have suggestions or advice for taking interesting wushu photos? I really want to hear it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you guys next time.
Yeah.